So I wanted to respond to a guy called Kenny, one of your number, patron of mine, who asked me this question some months ago. Before I do, thank you. I'll do this in video form. Thank you to all the recent patrons, in the recent few days. Yes, since I made my little pledge video, and also over the last couple of months, because I always try, prior to that, I've got a message out, a thank you message, and just one thing has gone on top of another, and that's fallen to the wayside, and I'm acutely aware of that. And although my thank you messages have often been a few weeks late, they've always sort of appeared, and that hasn't happened. I won't list the people that have pledged, because I know that some people don't like that. I don't know why some people do that. On the end of the video, they'll read out patrons' names, and yet if you look at a lot of patrons, they set who they pledge to as private, etc., or they don't particularly want their real name advertised. So I wonder exactly how people feel about that. But I'd rather respect people's anonymity as much as I can there. If you set your pledges public and it is your real name and it's there, yes, people can search you out, but that's as far as it goes for me. Thank you for pledging. Thank you for your support. I really appreciate that. And one of the things that I try and do is that if people have questions, I'll answer them. If you're an $8 patron, I guarantee you an answer, but I'll often give answers anyway. And one person that asked a question was a guy called Kenny about afterbirth abortion. That's what I want to talk about in this video. And Kenny asked this question a few months ago, and then I intended to answer it sooner after I'd answered a couple of others, and I didn't get round to it. And then it was the summer, and I took a month off effectively, and then my computer's gone wrong since then. So I'm going to get on with it now. So this is what Kenny had to ask, and there's a few different parts to this question. So hopefully my response, well, it will be rambling, but I'll try and keep some kind of structure to it. Would you consider discussing the ethics of after-birth abortion? Presented in the journal with a link below. So I'll link this into the comments. This would be under the premise that late-stage abortion until the day the fetus stroke baby is born, should be a mother's right, like it is in 8 US states. I don't know what that means by a mother's right. In the UK, it's a mother's right, but not just sort of on demand. It's got to be for something pretty serious. You know, normal abortions take place. They try and get them in, I think, under 18 weeks. You can go up to 24 weeks. After that, it's something serious, and you're talking. The statistics I saw, it was the Daily Express, which are vehemently opposed to this kind of thing. So they wouldn't have underplayed it. I think in maybe the year 2014, there were or 2013, there were in the last few weeks, the last 3 weeks or whatever of a normal pregnancy, there were, I think, 3 very late abortions in the whole of the United Kingdom carried out. I mean, they're for something very, very serious where there's terrible brain damage or something like that has been found, where the quality of life would be abysmal, and it would just be a lifetime encumbrance upon the parents with, like I say, no quality of life for the individual. Would you also consider discussing any possible paternal rights to afterbirth abortions that would be logical if we accept that late-stage abortion should be a mother's right? Maybe the bit I'll talk about first, that is. Finally, would you consider if the commonly used societal justification for forcing fathers to financially support their suspected children of it's not for the benefit of the mother, it's for the benefit of the child, could even apply to a non-person infant that does not have the right to life? I didn't really totally understand that, I've got to be honest. It would also be interesting to hear your unpremised opinion on late-term abortions and afterbirth abortions. Maybe start with that bit. Okay, so what I think about late-term abortions and afterbirth abortions. For me, I'm not happy with late-term abortions. It makes me feel uneasy, you know, knowing how well a child is developed at that point, a fetus is developed at that point. It's very much in those terms an unborn baby. And I'm not happy about it, but I'm practical with these things. And, you know, however uneasy I feel, I can see that there are circumstances where it's the best thing to do. When push comes to shove, you know, it's the best thing to do. I wouldn't want to see that taken away. I wouldn't want to see a hard line drawn on this and sort of, no, after so many weeks, it doesn't matter what's going to be, what state that baby is going to be born in. You've just got to carry on with it. So late-term abortions, they make me feel uneasy. I think they make most people feel uneasy. And in fact, there's a diminishing apparently number of doctors that will perform them because it's very traumatic for a doctor to effectively, what they have to do is to cut the baby up inside the mother, kill the baby, cut it up, and then drag it out sort of limb by limb. And there's not many doctors that perform abortions that can have the stomach for that. It's a pretty gruesome business, to be honest. After-birth abortions, which is what this was about. And the article made a sort of... it had two planks to it, really. One is that it talked about very heavily disabled children and the premise upon which we'd often have very late-term abortions and extending that, saying, well, some things can happen, severe brain damage could happen during birth, and so there's some understanding of extending that. But I think birth for me, I mean, it talks about, it says something here. It says, where is it? Our point here is that although it is hard to exactly determine when a subject starts or ceases to be a person, a necessary condition for a subject to have a right to X is that she is harmed by a decision to deprive her of X. The first bit of that is critical to me. Although it is hard to exactly determine when a subject starts or ceases to be a person, damn right it is. and whenever we have a situation like that, I suppose it's like the sort of age of consent with sex, where actually in the UK law, it's not the age to which you can consent, it's the age to which your consent will be legally recognised. It's a distinction that a lot of people don't understand. Well, that is 16, right? And that's a very, very arbitrary figure. And obviously there are some people that are mentally, because it's mental maturity, I think, is one of the key factors there. There are 14, 15-year-olds who are more mentally mature than some 16 and 17-year-olds. Yet we set a very arbitrary line, and then we're very steadfast in that line and how we respond to people who deviate from that line, because we understand why that line is there, the purpose that it serves. In some ways, we can avoid a little bit of that arbitrariness when it comes to abortion, and there is that line in the sand, which is the day the baby is born, the minute the baby is spewed out, sort of thing. And if you get away from that, I think in a way, whatever line you draw is more arbitrary than the line that you had before, and that concerns me. So I can read this and think about the philosophical implications of some of it. I even wonder with the authors, whether with push comes to shove, if you were to say, okay then, what you're suggesting here, let's put it into practice, and it's going to be your signatures going down there, right? You've got to sign your name to it. You're the people that are going to have to stump up and answer for how it pans out, whether suddenly the sort of blood would draw away from their faces and the confidence would go a little bit there, because it's a pretty big fucking thing once you start getting into those realms, and it would concern me that it's rife for abuse. They talk about calling it after-birth abortion rather than calling it infanticide. I can certainly understand that, but they also talk about using that term rather than euthanasia. For me, I mean, I'm an advocate of euthanasia, and it may well be that if you wanted to go down that line, actually, for me, it would be preferable to regard it as euthanasia and to have the same checks. That effectively, once you're born, then the same checks kick in for anybody else. Okay, so if you're born and if a child is born in a tremendously mentally handicapped state, just a gibbering fucking handicap wreck, unable to perceive the world in any reasonable sense as we would understand it, then there may be a case for euthanizing that child. But that's what I'd rather it was referred to, and I'd rather have the same checks that would take place there as would take place with an adult or with an old person. Now, obviously, with an old person, you would expect at some stage to have had their consent, to have said, yeah, I don't want my life to carry on anymore, and for that to be a function of it. Obviously, that couldn't be a function of that procedure, but that's the same with anything to do with children, right? We don't ask children, right, you need an operation on your leg, I need you to sign the consent. It doesn't work quite like that, does it? So the parents would be involved, the doctors would be involved. But the idea of it being an afterbirth abortion, I find a little bit abhorrent, really. Even if we would have a mechanism, is what I'm saying, to deal with things like that. So I think that's kind of how I feel about that. So, yeah, let's just read out some of the bits of the question, because I want to go through some of these bits. So this would be under the premise of late-stage abortion should be a mother's right. Interesting, because that's what the article says about it being a mother's right. And then you said... would you also consider discussing any possible paternal rights to afterbirth abortion that would be logical if we accept a late-stage abortion should be a mother's right? I would have thought that should have said if we accept that an afterbirth abortion should be a mother's right. Because it seems to me, yeah, the whole article there that's been linked talks about it as a mother's right, but fundamentally the reason we see as abortion as more of a mother's right, I think, and I agree with that, right? I've had arguments with this online before, but my position from a practical basis and for the status of a mother, that she's got the child inside her, that it's hard shit, it's unfair on fathers that the situation is so asymmetrical. But that's just the way it is. She's got it inside her and you haven't, and that's just there are these things that are tough. It's tough shit on women, I suppose, that physically they're weaker than men. But again, that's just something else. That's just dad shit. That's just the way it is. And so women have a little bit of extra choice there that men don't get to make, and they end up living with the consequences of that choice. But once you've got past the point of birth, it's not in her body anymore. So why should it just be a mother's choice? And... so you'd either have to have a situation where either the mother or the father could decide to abort, which is ludicrous if the other one didn't want to. So really you're looking at a situation where it would take both to make that decision. Because either parent at that point could abdicate from being a parent, but not abrogate their parental responsibilities in terms of finances, at least, I suppose, at that situation. So yeah, that would, to me, any decision that was made, if you had that system, fathers and mothers would have to be on the same footing. That would seem like the only fair situation that you could have there. So and that chimes in with something I made a video a period in the past, a couple of years ago, about. It was an article about artificial wombs, and I started considering that in relation to fathers and fathers' rights. And maybe you could have a situation there where, say, 20 weeks into a pregnancy, a mother decides she wants an abortion, the father says, well, actually, I'd quite like to keep this child. So if it wasn't too invasive, why shouldn't, rather than that child being aborted, that fetus being aborted, I should say, why shouldn't it be placed in an artificial womb, and then the father gets to bring up the child, and then the mother will be in the position effectively then that she'll have to pay the maintenance payments and either play a part in that child's life if she wishes, obviously, or not if she doesn't wish to do so. But why the situation shouldn't reverse that? It seemed to me that it should. So I think if you had a situation like this, yes, it would put fathers on a more level playing field, but it's not something that I'd particularly want to see, you understand, because for me, afterbirth abortion, it's a little bit worrying to me, actually. Where does it go from there? It just seems something a little bit too open to abuse. I like the certitude of the firm line in the sand with that. Finally, would you consider if the commonly used societal justification for forcing fathers to financially support their suspected children, if it's not for the benefit of the mother, it's for the benefit of the child, could even apply to a non-person infant, that does not have the right to life? I didn't really know what that meant by non-person infant that doesn't have the right to life. Did you mean non-person infant? You meant a day-old baby that we're not going to regard as a person because it's too handicapped? Are we talking about non-humans now, other animals, or I don't know. I wasn't quite sure, but I found it interesting. The bit I wanted to comment on with that bit was that it's not for the benefit of the mother, it's for the benefit of the child as the reason for forcing fathers to financially support their children. I've never viewed it in that way. If in the United Kingdom, if the father doesn't financially support that child and the mother is unable to do so, then the state has to step in. And so for me, it's not for the benefit of the child so much as just a practical step for the benefit of the state. It stops men going around and impregnating woman after woman. If you want to have 12 fucking children, right, then as far as I'm by 12 different mothers, then as far as I'm concerned, you should be suffering a bit for that. I shouldn't be suffering for it on the grounds that you can't keep your cock in your pants or put a fucking condom on. It's me that's suffering for it otherwise. And every other taxpayer bringing your children up for you. It's just too easy, for you to go around spreading your seed and saying, well, I'm not going to fucking support any of these kids. Because somebody has to support them, and if the mother can't support them, then it's the state that ends up doing so. It's the taxpayers that end up doing so. And so that's always been my position, really. It's been a practical matter rather than anything else. And like I said, if you had artificial wombs, the reason that I would similarly hold mothers financially responsible again is for the same thing, right? I'd sooner you pay for your fuck up than me, quite honestly, right? That's kind of how it boils down. So yeah, how that figures into after birth abortions. Well, like I say, my position on these after birth abortions is that it's not something. It seems a step too far to me. If you need to euthanize a newly born baby because it's so severely handicapped, it may well be that we need to go a stage past. At the moment, we kind of fuck about, don't we? We know what decision we ought to make, but we can't make it. And it's, we can withdraw some life support and allow it to fucking gradually fade away, probably in pain, right? The same as we can do with old people. We can allow them to fucking die over a period of several fucking hours in pain, right? But morally we can't actually help them just end their life. It's something slightly kind of sick about that, isn't there? Really. But that's kind of the way we work. And for me, what I would want is a situation where effectively you accept that what you're doing is you're euthanizing that baby, if that is what you're doing, and you would have the same kind of situation set up for that as you would for adults. And it's something I would like to see for adults. I think it should be something that should be available for us. Albeit with adults, you're obviously the same as anything else with adults. You get to play a little bit more of an active role than children do, and young children especially. Okay, so I hope that's answered the point that you had, Kenny, and I'm sorry that it took so long to get this response out. Okay, cheers and take care.